Hi, folks. As luck would have it, after we finished recording this episode, Apple went ahead and released Safari 13 early and also announced ITP 2.3. So while those aren't covered in the show, those happened after we recorded. However, our guest, Cory Underwood, was nice enough to write up a summary of those, and we've included those in the show notes on our website at analyticshour.io. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. Tim, Michael, Mo, and the occasional guest discussing digital analytics issues of the day. Find them on Facebook at facebook.com/analytics hour and their website analyticshour.io. And now, the Digital Analytics Power Hour.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 125. A long time ago, we needed to remember what links on a page we had clicked so that we could make those previously clicked ones purple and the unclicked ones still blue. And you know what? All was right with the world. A cookie. Isn't that a fun word? Lou Montulli came up with that when he was writing some of the first internet browsers. This is the point in which you insert the ominous heavy metal guitars signifying something bad is about to happen, because just 25 short years later, we are in some deep shit and the browsers are going crazy. Nobody accepts cookies anymore. Great job, Lou. There are three main players in the browser game: Apple, Mozilla, and Google. And unlucky for us, they've all decided to have different ideas about what it means to handle cookies in 2019 and beyond. Hey, Mo, who's your favorite cookie handling browser?
I feel like that's a trick question.
That's not. I had to introduce you some way.
Yeah, true. And very odd. I feel like they get odder with time.
Yeah. Oh, so you don't have a favorite yet. No consensus. You're holding judgment until we get into this conversation. Very wise. Tim, you're a man of strong opinions, though. Surely you've got a favorite browser that handles cookies a certain way.
Oh, the Chips Ahoy browser. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like it. Actually, that's a missed opportunity. Yeah, corporate. I'm Michael Helbling. I'm going to have to say I'm a fan of the Apple method. Just burn them all to the ground. No, I'm just kidding.
Burnt cookies.
Yeah, burnt cookies. It really burns my cookies. So we have been trying to keep up with all these changes and challenges. And we even did an episode on ITP, which is what Apple's been doing, back on episode 114. But even then, we struggled with all the details. So we turned to the one person we've all been turning to on Measure Slack this year, our guest, Cory Underwood. He's a senior programmer analyst at LL Bean. And for some reason, he spent a ton of time this year becoming one of the most expert people on this topic in our industry. And we are super glad to have you on the show. Welcome, Cory.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, turns out you're pretty popular on the Measure Slack these days because you have managed to keep all this stuff straight. So, maybe just to get us kicked off, what the heck are you doing up there in Maine? And why has this become a topic that you decided, hey, you know what? I probably better get to the bottom of all this.
I have a strong developer background, and just naturally, I keep news feeds of like the different browser updates. I read the patch notes, craziness, because I like to know what's going to break. And with the cookies being the different privacy policies and the handling of state changing with all the different browsers, you start realizing, hey, I actually understand how that tech works and what that might mean for reporting and modeling. And then you're thinking, wow, if that changes, then that might break. Or it might not break, but the data that it displays might not actually reflect the reality.
Okay, so it seems like the rate of changes, like I get that you're super across this stuff, but for me, I'm kind of like, oh, what's happening now? And it just seems like there is just, I don't even actually know how you keep up other than reading all the notes.
Twitter helps because all the different browsers like to advertise when they're doing something for privacy. It's a big topic right now, especially with all the legal changes going on in various parts of the world. And they link to documentation or news articles about what they're doing. Although I have to admit, we're at like 16 or 18 something changes since January. So it's getting to be a little bit crazy trying to keep up with everything, especially when they all have different concepts of what they feel they should be doing.
I feel like we should say that one of the things, Cory, you did was kind of rattle off a list of the changes just kind of prior to recording. I think we should throw that in our show notes. That's crazy, and it seems like it's all browsers are they all kind of iterating kind of in a little bit of a privacy one-upsmanship arms race on this topic? Like, it seems like all the big three are all kind of going berserk with this all of a sudden.
Well, I would say Mozilla who creates Firefox, they've traditionally tried to put a lot of light on the subject. So several years ago, they came out with Lightbeam that would do a data visualization of all like the third-party tracking as a tool. And they've tested different things over the time. Like they were the first to implement the do not track header specification that ultimately fell through. And they've tried to do different things in a way that preserves privacy, but it still leaves it up to the user, but additionally doesn't break the internet when they do it.
Do not track, am I right that do not track they implemented it, did it kind of fail because it was still up to sites to honor do not track? Like, why did do not track fail?
The actual specification, they leave it up, you can go read it. And they're like, we're going to stop development, in part because people haven't fully implemented it yet. And it's been out for years. And we're not seeing a lot of support from outside vendors and sites to honor it. And so they just kind of said, well, it doesn't have any legal backing. So even if the browser says, don't track me, there's nothing compelling whatever the browser's talking to honor that.
You're punishing the good actors and the bad actors are going to ignore it. So if anything, you're somewhat making it worse.
Right. And so with that, Safari's like, well, we're going to remove the do not track support because that's just going to allow people to do fingerprinting, which is we're against. And they actually have taken a much more drastic view than Mozilla, because what they've done is they've come down with a set of standards in their intelligent tracking prevention, and they're doing things that cause a fork in how the JavaScript will actually execute on the browser compared to Firefox. So in the case of Firefox, it still allows everything to run, whereas in Safari, it will run, but it won't run quite like you think it will. And depending on how your site works, that might actually be a problem. Google has come into this more recently, in large part, I think, because Mozilla and Apple have really kind of upped the envelope. And I kind of consider Google to be in sort of a hard place here because they obviously drive a lot of their revenue from advertising. So they're trying to do things, but they're also not going quite as far as I think the privacy activists would want them to.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of like, hey, let's pretend to do a bunch of stuff and hope everybody leaves us alone so we can keep advertising.
The one thing that Google really does that I actually appreciate is they don't just decide to do it and risk breaking things. They do things more like Mozilla does, where they try to give a lot of advance notice and they put out proposals and they try to get other browsers to adopt them rather than going off kind of on their own path.
That's surprising.
Because one thing with tech is even if you get someone to adopt the standard today, there's all the legacy
right
of all of the other people that don't auto upgrade and things like that you still have to support.
But so Chrome is still, like, that is the most used browser.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised. Like, what are Google doing at the moment? Because, yeah, oh God, this topic, like every time I feel like I need a beer and like a rant every time I think about it.
I think it's kind of dangerous to kind of point to what the most used browser, because I think it really does wind up varying based on where you're operating and kind of desktop versus mobile. The whole stat counter site, which I don't know whether I think that's fairly credible data, and you start slicing it and you see all sorts of different. So I think that's a true statement from a global macro everywhere. But if you're looking just at mobile, sometimes all of a sudden mobile Safari, bounces to the top, but that depends on where it is, I think.
And I have to say, one of the really interesting things about my role now is that I've always worked on businesses that are like Australia, New Zealand, like very Western focused. And when you start looking at device usage in different countries, because obviously Canva is a global business, it is totally different. Like, you always presume iOS is going to be higher than Android, and then you go to I don't know, Indonesia or Brazil or something, and it skews a complete opposite way. And so, yeah, I do agree with your point that you need to be careful about just generalizing that whatever is the most used.
But to answer your question, the one thing that Google has done right now is they rolled out back earlier this summer some changes to how they process cookies. And basically, they proposed a change to the cookie specification where there's a extra attribute that they put on the cookie. And that determines by default who gets to access that data when it's viewed in a third-party context. And what I like about that is it actually closes a specific type of attack known as cross-site request forgery. So their solution, while it was more limited, actually eliminates an attack vector at the same time.
Yeah, wow. But so it's interesting. Like I'm dealing with all of this, I suppose, more from like an attribution perspective. And yeah, I suppose Google still has stakes in trying to help people identify, you know, clicks and all that sort of stuff for their marketing platforms. I suppose like Safari and the rest of them, I mean, they don't really have a stake in that game, right? So for them, it's just not as important.
Right. So Google's main revenue stream is mostly advertising. Like some huge percentage of their money comes from advertising. Apple does hardware, and they also get a huge amount of commission off the iTunes and the App Store, etc.
Yeah, they just print money off of transactions in the iOS store. Yeah.
Right. Mozilla is interesting in that it's technically a nonprofit, so they're not trying to earn a ton of revenue. They're trying to stay in business, but it's not like they have a product that they're really trying to push for pay. They get a lot of money for donations and as part of their contract for default search engine placement.
And we haven't even talked about Microsoft yet.
Microsoft is so late into these discussions. They are doing a couple different things right now. They decided to stop supporting Edge's custom backend that they built. And they're adopting Blink, which is the rendering engine that Google created for Chrome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in addition to that, they've outlined a plan where they want to kind of follow the same sort of mechanisms Mozilla's done with Firefox for anti-tracking, but it's still in the beta releases, and I've seen really inconsistent reports on what actually gets blocked and what's allowed through and what that means, at least in the previous release that I reviewed. So they've announced plans, but we have yet to get like actual details on how that's going to shake out.
It feels like with these different changes, and you kind of mentioned this already, Cory, that like Google with Chrome is sort of saying, hey, we're going to take the concept of a cookie and we're going to try to create new standards that extend the functionality of it by adding these different things. Whereas the other browsers are kind of like, we're going to take cookies and we're really going to mash them down and we're going to block a lot of what they do. It feels like that would have the effect of pushing advertisers and others further into the nooks and crannies of the browser, like into like device fingerprinting and local storage and all these other shenanigans that are like not even worse, so to speak. I don't know if it's not really like there's no morality with any of this. It's just more like what you do with it. But I don't know, like, so does that also come into it? It's just like, is that just a better way of thinking about it? I hate to give Google any credit, honestly, but here they are.
I think so. This is actually an interesting thing. So if you look at Safari's tracking prevention policy, this is a quote from it. We treat circumvention of shipping anti-tracking measures with the same seriousness as exploitation of security vulnerabilities. And if a party attempts to circumvent our tracking prevention methods, we may add additional restrictions without prior notice, and these restrictions may apply universally, algorithmically, classified to specific targets, or parties engaging in the circumvention.
But I think they forgot to like just at Zuckerberg before they wrote that, right?
Possibly.
No, you're absolutely right. That is crazy, honestly, to me, for them to say that.
But to your point, you can still do a lot of the same tracking. You just don't do it on the browser. You do it on the server.
Right.
And it's kind of like, what's the easiest way to not be injured in a fight? Well, you don't get into one. And so if you're not fighting with the browser, but you're still able to do everything that you were doing, well, then it might work to an acceptable degree, and you don't have to worry about Safari. Because if it's not happening within view of the browser, it's harder for them to prove that you're doing it to begin with.
Nice.
So how does that, how succinctly can you explain how that works server side from a simple of I want to identify somebody when they return to the site as a returning visitor? How does that happen purely server side?
It doesn't happen purely server side, but it can typically. So what happens, as far as Safari is concerned, they really are coming down hard on cookies that are set on the client. So any cookies that get loaded by like tags, but it has this unfortunate side effect of actually breaking some site functionality too. So for example, say you have a consent dialog because you're concerned about GDPR. Maybe you store that in a cookie and it was just client-side logic that displayed the dialog and you didn't see any reason to come all the way back to the server to set the cookie, etc. Safari can't determine what the intent is. And so from a security perspective, this makes a lot of sense. If you can't determine the intent, you classify it as bad. And based off other conditions and what version of ITP the person's on, the cookie will get set for 7 days, even if it's originally intent for like 2 years, or it'll get set for 24 hours, even if it's originally set for 30 days. So the user experience in that situation would be getting that pop up way more often. But to what Tim was talking about, how would you do that? You can set the cookie on the server to identify the visitor. And then the server would call the third party as opposed to the client. So with how most tag managers work, the tag managers load the JavaScript code, and then you can actually look in the developer tools in the network panel, and you can see all those calls go out. And on a server-side implementation, those same calls go out, but it's not in view of the browser. So as the page is loading, those calls get issued. Segment, I believe, has a model where it's server-side out of view of the client. And so something like that could potentially still work.
And yeah, except it's a massive pain in my backside that I'm dealing with right now. Because when you send it, and I think I've got this right, because it's sending server side, when it's pushing to our analytics tools, I don't have any of the user's browser information. So basically, in an analytics tool, all of this traffic is coming from Segment, basically.
And you'd have to pass that through for Segment to pass it to the analytics system.
You're literally going back to the beginning of analytics where we used to put all kinds of URL parameters in to show what was being tracked.
I need to have a little bit of a rant. So when all of this stuff happened with like privacy and people were like obsessed with their call logs getting, you know, recorded by telephone companies, and it's like, I don't want to have my phone in my pocket and it be pinging off a telephone tower, and then suddenly a telephone company knows where I am. And I'm like, you have to have that to make your phone work. Like, you have to connect to a telephone tower. Like, that's kind of essential for the technology. And I feel like this is the exact same discussion as like, there is some portion of like, you need to have cookies to make the internet work. So I don't know. Like, anyway, I'm off the soapbox now.
So it seems like in some cases, there's really clever constructs that work. Like when cookies were initially conceived and somebody with a lot of foresight said the only site that can read this cookie will be the site that set the cookie. Like that was one that seemed like kind of genius. Like if that hadn't been there, oh my God, we would have been having this discussion in about the first year of the internet or the first year of invention of the cookies, right? So it seems like that's part of what everyone's trying to get around to is how is a way that you can enable functionality that's reasonable while blocking off the tracking. And the fact is data has to be collected and stored in order for the functionality to work.
Right. And to what Mo was saying, cookies are absolutely essential because that's what allows the session to happen between your web browser and the remote server. So things like e-commerce and banking and all of that good stuff that people do on the internet, logging into their social media, that only works because there is a cookie that says on every page load, hey, I'm still this person that you just authenticated last page.
So let me be clear. So what you're advocating for is a blockchain-based identity system for the web? I'm sorry. That was just, I just saw it hanging there and just had to take a swing at it.
Simo actually did point out in Measure Slack recently, though, that the Apple engineer who's responsible for ITP has put forth a proposal for authentication. and to get that to work on a separate sort of system that isn't involved with cookies. But as a interesting aspect of what he has proposed is when they're not logged in, all the temporary storage is erased, which would be like cookies and local storage and IndexedDB. And because he is right in that that stuff does not expire, but I think that is probably a little bit heavy-handed because there are legitimate use cases for keeping that around longer term.
So sorry, why delete it?
I can show you the specification if you really want to read it, but it is largely because the data does not expire by itself. In the case of cookies, it can have an expiration date, but in like local storage and session storage and IndexedDB, once you set that, it'll sit there forever. And he's thinking, at least this is my interpretation of it, they're not logged in anymore. Maybe we shouldn't persist all that data.
Well, so at a macro level, we've got different players. They all want to own the solution. Whoever figures out the solution, and there are a million little point startups saying we'll be the solution, but they're going to struggle mightily to ever get enough scale to be adopted as the solution. Like, it just feels like it's so big and complex. You can drill down into the details of Firefox or Safari or Chrome, and they're all different flavors of the same thing. You can point out limitations. You can point out how the analyst is getting screwed. Like, it just feels intractable. Like, the job of the analyst is back, like Michael was saying. It's like 10 or 15 years ago where there's a need to just understand way down in the weeds of what's going on. And the weeds have gotten a lot messier and more complicated than they were 10 or 15 years ago. There's my rant.
Mm-hmm. And I would definitely agree with that. And that's why when things go through the standardization for browser adoption, that's why that takes years, because all the different parties that want to be involved argue it out.
Yeah.
The specification before it finally gets like ratified. And then even after it's ratified, it's, months before browsers actually implement it in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing here is it seems like these changes are happening much faster and without very much warning. And there's not really much clarity at all on where this will actually end up.
And I agree, because Safari's done a lot of things. I'm just like, wow, that's going to break all kinds of different things. And in fact, on their policy that they say, here's unintended impact that this could affect. And the list is funding websites using targeted or personalization for advertising, measuring the effectiveness of advertising, log on using a third-party login provider, single sign-on to multiple websites controlled by the same organization, embedded media that uses the user's identity to respect their preferences, like buttons, federated comments, or other social widgets, fraud prevention, bot detection, improving the security of client authentication, analytics and scope of a single website, and audience measurement. All those things could break by what they're doing, and they're going to consider fixing them on a case-by-case basis based off what they consider the severity is.
What?
Yeah. So,
but okay, so what worries me the most is, so like, even from the last time we did a show where we talked about ITP 2.0, and you can correct me if I'm definitely wrong, Cory, that was 7-day cookie expiration, and now 2.2 is 24 hours. Is that
right? That's correct. And a couple of conditions have to happen.
Okay.
So 2.2 is already on mobile if the device was capable of uploading to mobile, like with their update in May. Based off what we've seen, it's likely to come out in Mac OS X's October release with the desktop version. Now, for the 24-hour timer to kick in, as opposed to 7 days, a couple conditions have to be met. One of them would be the referring domain must be classified as a known tracker based off whatever Safari's machine learning algorithm has determined. And the second half of that is it has to have a query string or fragment on the URL. So if you have any name value pairs, such as like advertising name value pairs because you care about channel definition, then
wow,
potentially your look back window just got cut from 7 days to 24 hours.
I think what worries me is marketers have no fucking idea about this. These, like, People in companies are spending millions of dollars every week, and I genuinely don't think they know how much this is affecting the numbers that they're reporting back to a business. That it scares me.
You already see this where advertising companies and agencies are already saying we do not recommend targeting Safari-based audiences. They're just already being like, yeah, we don't even know what to do with them anymore.
But it's just like, do you know what? It's making my life way easier because people keep asking me for a custom data-driven attribution model, and I can just be like, computer says no, we have to do last click.
Yeah.
Like 24-hour last click. That's all you got, kid.
Good luck with those year-over-year channel comparisons.
So if you're not bringing all that data in and storing it server-side and able to have some sort of deterministic event to link two separate visits longer than 24 hours apart, like you can't basically reconstruct that look-back window.
Mm.
Yep, which is an unrealizable hurdle for most anybody. All right, conversation's going great so far, but we got to get to our sponsors with another multi-touch moment. All right, Josh, I'm super excited about this one. So you remember when we talked about the great folks that brought us whatisagoodbouncerate.com, right?
That's actually my browser homepage.
As it should be. But get ready to open a new tab and make that one a default because they've done it again. They have now launched whatisagoodconversionrate.com. Josh, how lucky do you feel to be working in our industry at a time when websites like this are coming out?
Man, this really just solves all of my problems logging into Adobe via the Experience Cloud. I'm never going to use it again.
Exactly. It's just so simple now. All you do, go to that website, type in your URL, accept the terms of service, and click the next button, and it's going to tell you what a good conversion rate for your website is. I'm blown away. They've done it again, and they're doing it with science and data. And that's what's so great about it. I mean, when you look at what your conversion rate should be, especially for marketing channels like display advertising and social media, I mean, what can you expect? And this website's finally going to give you the answer.
Bookmarked.
Excellent. Well, and I'm sure I will be using it all the time. It's making my job so easy. I mean, CMOs come to me all the time and ask me this question. Michael, what should my conversion rate be? Or what's my competitor's conversion rate like? And now I know. I can say, let's go check it out together on whatisagoodconversionrate.com. Okay, I want to do something because last time we tried to get into this topic, we did a lot of talking in this kind of thing, but we got to the end of the podcast and we started hitting some really good detail. So I want to start sooner. And I just want to ask you, Cory, a bunch of questions, browser by browser, to give our listeners an understanding of exactly how they're treating cookies.
Sure.
Right? Because a lot of people have some idea, but it's wishy-washy. They don't really know. So we'll call this sort of the cookie deletion lightning round, if you will. Okay, so let's start with the first mover in the space, or at least in this current iteration of the hell that we live in right now, which is Apple. So Apple, ITP 2.1, ITP 2.2, we just covered it. Basically, 2.2 is already on mobile and is coming to your desktop soon. And that's the one where a cookie, even if it's first party, set by front-end code, will be deleted either in 7 days or 24 hours, depending on whether Apple thinks it's kosher or not.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else that people should know about that?
There's some things with third-party cookies regarding how long that they're allowed to stick around for and when they can be accessed. Even though the script is loaded in a third-party context, it can't access the cookies from a third-party context unless something on the page has engaged with that in order to invoke the storage API for Safari. So in that case, the third-party tags that you may not have access to their storage mechanisms, which could be problematic if this tag needs a concept of history to do what it's supposed to be doing.
Right. And then the only workaround here is basically server-side cookie setting.
That is basically what I think is the key here, because they have come back and said, we don't want tags that you may not be aware of doing this, but if you specifically go out of your way to set them on the server, then we're going to assume that you know what you're doing about it.
Well, hold on. Let me ask. So this, because with Apple, since I am an iPhone user, and I know there's another kind of messy world. If I'm in Facebook, the whole embedded browsers, if I'm in Facebook and click on a link and it winds up loading the mobile browser, is that loading like a Safari Lite, or is that a Facebook developed browser? I know it's given Analyst fits for years on all sorts of fronts, but where does browsers embedded in other apps, where do those come in?
My understanding for iOS is it's like a light version of Safari. So it's not loading the ITP code, but it is doing the web view for the rendering of the markup. The one thing I wanted to say, though, is part of the reason that you would probably have issues with that is as they cross between the native app and the web pages, if you don't have some sort of linking system in place, then you double count everything.
Oh.
Okay.
Browser technology.
I really want to leave marketing analytics and go back to product analytics. I think it's weirdly now seeming easier, which I never ever have said before in my life.
All right, Mo, we're still in the lightning round. This is the cookie deletion lightning round. All right. Firefox. They rolled out enhanced tracking prevention. What does it do? What do marketers and analysts need to know about this?
All right. So starting in June, it was for any new installs. Starting a couple weeks ago, it was for all installs. By default, it will not allow cookies that do cross-site tracking, fingerprinting, etc., from accessing their storage. So, in what I've been observing is the cookie gets set, but then if you look at the network call, the cookie's not passed. And a good example of this would be, at least in the current version that's coming out in October, DoubleClick sets an IDE cookie. That's the name of the cookie. I don't know what it is. It's encrypted. And if you have enhanced tracking prevention turned off, all of the clicks to DoubleClick contain that cookie and they pass it. Turn that on, you can still see the cookie in your browser, but all those network calls will go through without that data. So in that case, what it's doing is it's not stopping the network calls unless they're doing crypto mining or something of the sort, but what they're getting is none of the state. And if the tag needs the state to do something specific quickly, a recommendation engine has a cold start problem. And as you interact with it, it gets more refined. But if every time you view the recommendation engine, you're a new person, because this is basically what that's making that do, it's never going to get more accurate. It's still going to be like a random assortment.
Yep. Take that, rich relevance. Right. Which, like, innocent bystander. Totally. Like the people who provide recommendation engines for e-commerce providers, Monetate, Rich Relevance, all those guys, they're just getting jacked.
Now, I want to say one other thing about Firefox. If they decide to turn it on strict, which is different than default, that's an option for them. And that stops things at the network level. Like the third-party code that's classified as one of these tracking domains from their list they look at doesn't even load. And that can break your site if it's dependent on that functionality.
All right. And now, nope, lightning round still, Tim. Don't even. Still on the lightning round. I know I violated it this time too. But now Chrome, because Chrome so far is mostly just talking but hasn't done anything, or where are they at and what's happening with cookies in Chrome?
So Chrome added support for the same site attribute on their cookies to both eliminate the cross-site request forgery attack in Chrome, as well as limit who naturally gets given access to cookies when they load in specific contexts. Now, they also have expressed interest in making it so you can't access cookies at all unless you are on TSL, so HTTPS support for your site. They haven't done that yet, but I know that's on their plan, and they've recently come out with basically a policy stance, much like Mozilla and Safari have, detailing 5 different proposals they have for where they want to take it. Now, they've stopped just short of implementing those to this point because they're trying to get some more discussion before they go ahead and just do the things. But if any of those get significant advancement, then they would probably implement those as well.
And it's probably worth mentioning that as of this recording, the analyticshour.io website is fully secured under HTTPS. And actually, that is directly because of Tim's good friend, Jason Packer, and now my really good friend, because I had to give him a login to my hosting provider to be able to do it. But huge shout out to Jason. Thanks so much for your help getting that. And now just in the nick of time so we could keep setting lots of tracking cookies in safety on Chrome. Okay, last of the not so lightning round. we did talk a little bit about Microsoft Edge. Is there anything that people need to know? Does anybody care? I feel like we've always just been trying to get around IE and Edge. Nobody uses it.
Well, for IE, they actually don't want you to use it.
Yes.
And they've come out on record and actually said that. For Edge, they have plans to do something with blocking request and or access to the storage, but it's not clear what storage or how the blocking list will work and get populated, etc. And it's been fairly inconsistent in the last release build I looked at. So more to come on that, on how big of an impact that would actually be. And between all the different browsers, you may have to care about more than the other based off your respective browser mix. And then just because you have a high percentage of traffic from that browser doesn't actually mean you have anything to worry about. It would actually depend on your specific tech stack and how it works.
So what you're saying is that, Cory, you're now available for consulting work at $500 an hour to help people sort this out.
What's interesting is I feel like this is another thing where everything old is new again. Like all of a sudden it does start to seem like it's kind of urgent to take some very basic metrics and put them side by side by browser type, be that bounce rate, conversion rate, new versus returning visitors, not because you're necessarily going to get great insights, but I guess, Cory, because you've said a few times that it could break your site in some cases, and it seems like that's one. It's seldom going to break your tracking outside of flat out JavaScript blocking. It won't generally screw up. None of these are going to screw up your session cookie, are they? Like I'll be able to generally capture page to page to page in a session, or is even that at risk?
I think by default, you should be able to get session level traffic. It's cross session.
Right.
That really starts to break down.
Which Mo likes to say, so we should stop doing attribution. I'm like, well, no, you still get last touch attribution.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah, but who wants to do last touch attribution?
Who wants to do last touch attribution? Well, when it's
all you have.
When it's all you got.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the point. That's why I'm so depressed. I'm like, we may as well just spend the money, throw it to the wind. Who knows what happens with it?
Oh God, you're killing me.
After an episode on ad fraud and then this, I think, Mo, that's right. You just throw the money into the void and hope something good happens.
Just great creative. Go straight back to the Mad Men era.
Great product and great creative. Don't need to measure it. You just feel it. Oh.
So a good example of this, though, is, you have a system that measures history, essentially. And, hey, this person came, and then within X time, but slightly longer than the previous time, they came back. They're identified as new both times. Now, what does that look like in your reporting? Well, maybe your retention tanks, but you have all these new users. And as an analyst, if that doesn't ring any bells for you, then maybe you say, hey, we have to start giving our retention people discounts or what have you to hold them, when maybe their buying behavior hasn't actually changed.
Yeah.
Which, the same as, it's funny. I've just always steered away from visitors or users versus sessions or visits unless there's a really, really good reason. And I can tell that story. Believe me, I know the story of why those are so awesome, but so much stuff gets really messy, even without all the cookie deletion issues. Yeah. So many things get messier and harder to interpret. I'm finding myself more and more now when it comes to visitors and users. Oh my God, if it's, visits per visitor, and even new versus returning, which is kind of just this default thing to look at, really trying to steer clients away. Say, look, this isn't reliable. And let's think about, are we really prepared? If this really matters and we're really ready to make a decision on it, then we need to really understand all the limitations of it. Because more often than not, it's just like this simple idea that people kind of like and they kind of want to report on it. But I think that's this other piece of it, to say, know which of these metrics are going to be potentially really at risk. And repeat traffic is definitely one of them. And look for ways where you can live without that, understand the limitations of it when you are looking at it.
Right. And so if you want to mitigate it, then you have to understand both what the browser's doing as well as how that data is ingested and see if those things are compatible. And if they're not, then you have to figure out another way. Can you still source that data and doing it in a way that the browser's not going to fight you on it?
It's way too early to be this depressed.
But the other thing is to look at it, if you don't jump to wow, we broke down our new versus returning by browser type, and oh my God, like Edge, like they're so much more loyal. These Edge ones, we have so many more returning users, and you're like, wait a minute.
Someone is going to do that. Somewhere in the world, someone is going to do that.
Double our Bing spend. Okay. We are this show episode is not about solutions. It is just about enunciating the problem more clearly. But as always, we got a little bonus in there. But we do have to start to wrap up. So one of the things we like to do is go around the horn and share a last call. And I know, Mo, that you're super depressed right now, but maybe it'd make you happier if you shared a last call. Do you want to share your last call?
Yes, because actually, this is a great segue. My first of my last calls is about something that makes me really happy. So the CEO of Canva recently bought everyone this thing called the 5-Minute Journal, which I'm not going to lie, like I'm really skeptical. I know I shouldn't be, but I'm kind of skeptical about like positive psychology and meditation and yoga. And I try it and I roll my eyes. But I've been doing this thing called the 5-Minute Journal, and it's legitimately so positively impacting my life in terms of, I don't know, I just seem to be happier and more grateful and kind of looking around with a bit of a bop in my step. It is also like going into spring here, so it could be related to the weather, and I'm just thinking it's a journal when really it's not. But I'll send a link in the show notes because, yeah, it's basically you spend 2 minutes every morning, or 3 minutes every morning, 2 minutes at night, kind of reflecting on your day. And yeah, I don't want to give it away, but there's like a little introduction, and yeah, it's really putting a bounce in my step. But the other thing that is actually analytics related, which surprises me where I found it, it was a blog post from Mode, which is a data viz SQL tool thing. But it was really interesting because it's called The Problems with Hands-Off Analytics. And basically the article makes a comparison of like, if you're a person that works in security and someone has a policy, you don't just go like, oh, there's the policy, you should do that now. Like security teams tend to kind of hold people's hand and like walk the stakeholder through why it's important, help them set it up, and that we should really be doing the same with analytics and with dashboards. Like if someone wants a number, you don't just go, oh, hey, there's the number over there. You actually like hold their hand through the process and talk about like how you can interpret it and the right way to look at it and like what it would be useful for. And I just thought it was like a really cool comparison and kind of made me think a little bit differently about relationships with clients.
You're going to stop just dumping out numbers and say, oh, somebody asked me, your business users no more. You're going to say, oh, here's a number over there.
Yeah, but
I put my career on doing that.
I think it was a really cool comparison to make you think about like, yeah, you can't, someone yesterday was like, how many signups did we have for organic traffic yesterday? And it's really easy to just be like, we had this many. And you should actually be going back and being like, okay, can I like get some context around this? Like, why is that important? Like, and it turned out actually they'd asked me for direct. And then I'm like, actually, you mean you want to be looking at organic? Because that's a totally different thing. Anyway, I'm off the box. I'm down. Okay, I'm done.
And neither one of them are reliable because of browsers. And next thing you know, you sucked them down into a vortex.
Well, thankfully, we're using last click attribution, so it's fine.
Yay. All right. Cory, what about you? You're a guest, and do you have a last call you want to share?
I do, and this is actually related to Mo's comment about time zones earlier. Mm-hmm. There are 2 links that I'm going to provide. One is called The Problem with Time and Time Zones. Ooh. And it's related to what happens when you compare time zones and compare different clocks and the things that a programmer or an analyst that's doing time series data might have to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And the text link that I have to go with that is UTC is enough for everyone, isn't it?
Oh, I'm really excited.
And it goes into like the history of time and why it is actually so difficult to work with.
Oh my God. Like the whole railroads. And then there are 2 professors who are out promoting that everybody should be on UTC, right? Like there's actually, there are proposals out there that are like, let's just wipe them out entirely.
Well, to be honest, that's how we handle it here. Everything's in UTC. And yeah, so I'm very, very excited about this. I can't wait to read
it. But it doesn't solve, like, unless everybody starts living on, like, it doesn't solve everything, right? Because there's still daytime versus
time-based equivalent of flat earthers. Come on. No, I'm just kidding.
You haven't lived until you've seen like the same day go by twice.
That's right. All right.
Michael, you wanna go next? You always go last.
You know what? I do want to go next. Thanks, Tim. So my last call may or may not be completely invalidated by. No, I'm just kidding. So a recent announcement that's kind of a big deal in certain places, and like different vendors kind of dominate the marketplace. And so Adobe, for the longest time, has been a set of different products that you would create tagging for, like analytics and target and audience measurement, so on and so forth. And they recently wrote a blog post on Medium talking about how they've begun the process of combining that all into one SDK. And the only reason I think that's a big deal is because there's lots of people like me out there who go and implement these things and talk to clients about them, and having them all sit in the same code base is potentially very powerful and a good thing. So little things like having to wait for some sort of audience segment become available that you created in one tool become available in another tool used to take like a day. And like, this is at the forefront of like what they're doing to make that be like almost instantaneous, which is about freaking time, because Telium's been doing that for a while. No, I mean, that's the truth, right? So anyways, that's my last call. There's a great little article about it. The best thing about that article is it seemed like from some of the responses I saw from Adobe people, they didn't necessarily mean to write that so quick. So it might also be a little early too. I don't know. All right. Tim, what is your last call, sir?
I'm going to do a twofer, but it'll be quick. One is totally inspired by this episode because I was curious when you dropped the old Lou Montulli reference. And so this is an old post, but you guys ever listen to the Internet History Podcast? Ever heard of it?
Nope.
They basically get people who were doing various things in the history of the internet, and that's the podcast. But back in April of 2014, they did on the 20th anniversary, an oral history of Netscape's founding. So this is, maybe I'm going to sound like a ass of some sort, but so Lou Montulli's they basically went to a bunch of these people who were there when Mosaic and Netscape were kind of created. But my cousin is referenced, or he's quoted multiple times, Chris Wilson. And then like his best friend growing up was a guy named John Mittelhauser, and he wound up going to Netscape. But overall, it's kind of just a thinking back to where 25 years ago, sitting around what was going on at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and kind of how that evolved. Always kind of a fun little nostalgic walk down memory lane, I guess, for those of us who are not Zennials. My other one, completely unrelated, and I guess I got this from a millennial at the Search Discovery offices, but it's been circulating internally at Search Discovery, and it's actually a fun little tool. It's regexcrossword.com. It's basically, just think regex meets Sudoku.
Oh.
And you basically get different regex expressions where you would normally have numbers, and then you have to figure out what the regex has to match the whole row and the regex has to match the whole column. And it is incredibly humbling, but I think it's totally fine to have regex 101 up while trying to work through it. And there's some of them are simple little like 2x2s, but Shira Skarovsky, I'm sure I butchered her last name.
Keep
How do you
going.
pronounce Shira's last name?
Just how you did, I'm sure, Tim.
I'm sure. Well, she's the one who kind of posted it internally, and it's been causing a lot of joy and frustration at the same time. But it's also a good way to practice your regex.
And Cory, please wait till the end of the episode before you load that. No, I'm just kidding. Cory's like, I'll check that out. No. We have video. No, that is actually a really good last call, and I refuse to go to that website because I do not engage in games that I cannot win. So anyway, okay. you've probably been listening to this episode and you've been thinking, like Mo, oh no, we're screwed. Or like me, like, yay, we don't have to do attribution anymore. Or like Tim, how do we get to the bottom of all of this and really solve the problem for the marketers and the analysts out there? But no matter where you landed, I think you'll agree Cory's brought some pretty good light to this. But you may have additional questions, and you're in luck because Cory's actually pretty easy to get a hold of on the Measure Slack. And he's been pretty open with sharing his knowledge there. Although I'm sure he'd be happy if you wanted to pay him too. No, I don't know. I keep saying that, but like Cory's like looking at me like, dude, just shut up. Like, what the fuck? No. Anyways, so please do reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you on the Measure Slack or on Twitter or on our newly secured https://analyticshour.io, where we will continue to post shows and show notes. So if you're ever looking for a link to something that was discussed on the show, you can find it right on analyticshour.io. Cory, once again, thank you so much for taking the time. Your knowledge in this area is something that we have leveraged. I think all three of us and a lot of our listeners have leveraged. So it's great to finally get some definitive answers. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time. And it was good to see how the show worked from the other side of it.
Respect has plummeted.
Yeah. Not impressed.
AKA totally terrified and running screaming in the other direction.
That's right. So yeah, that's right. It's it's always good to not meet people who do podcasts. Okay. Anyways, I know that I speak for both Mo and Tim, my two co-hosts, when I say to you, even if you can't get your cookies to persist, you gotta keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, or Measure Slack group. We welcome your comments and questions. Visit us on the web at analyticshour.io, facebook.com/analyticshour, or at analyticshour on Twitter.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Analytics. Oh my God. What the fuck does that even mean?
That was one of those to say we recognize this is needed, but we're going to put a hard definition around it. Oh. But there are a lot of players that are going to really push because
the funniest part is your reaction, Tim. I say leave the dog in. Wow, that is an impressive bookshelf, sir. I'm very impressed.
That's one of 5 I have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is starting. There's some connections starting to be made here. Yeah. This is a guy who, once he gets into a topic, he kind of sticks with it for a while. Do you play the Dungeons and Dragons? Tim is all about like doing tons of preparation, and I'm sort of the antithesis of Tim, and so that's like the yin and the yang. There's never been a presentation that I have not prepared for.
Yes, but your form of preparation is like me.
No, that's not true. I prepare intensely, and I'm one of the top 5 rated speakers at.
I came back on for that.
Yeah.
Fuck you and the microphone you wrote in on.
So,
what kind of a popsicle
I
stand
don't know.
are we
We're trying.
here?
We're really trying to up our game, Cory. So we're really apologetic.
We have no shame, actually.
We don't. Okay, this is how the podcast works. We get together, we make fun of each other, we drink, we cuss a little bit, and then somehow a show happens.
Apparently, I'm still trailing Simo by quite a bit, but I'm in second place on Measure Slack.
Oh, really? Well, that's not a healthy goal, honestly. It's not. Yeah. Tim, just I need to stop here just 1 second. Hey, Mo, did you have your microphone muted there?
That is not. We're not going there today.
It's an honest question.
Another show goes down the drain because of you.
Oh, look, we got an outtake in our test audio. Rock flag and we're all screwed.